I'd like to welcome everybody to our 11th quarterly forum for the MEP 2040 commitment. Also want to express a Shana Tova, a happy Rosh Hashanah to everyone, and a happy 5785. We're really happy to have everybody join us today. We're going to be talking about company plans today. We've got 7 folks that are going to be sharing their company plans with us today. We're going to take the best part of an hour going through those company plans, and then we'll open the floor to questions from our audience. If you have questions, just hold on to them until we get to that point. We're going to open it up as long as we have questions. We'd also like to be able to get in some reports from our working groups. So I really hope that the discussion is lively enough that I have to cut you off at the 12:30 mark Eastern time, and then we'll as I said, have some working group reports. Any of you that would like to share your cameras so that we can see your bright and shiny faces this morning, please go ahead, introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're joining us from, and we'll get started into the program. The steering committee of MEP 2040 is made up of 10 volunteers that have taken upon themselves to put together things like the working groups and the forums. We're all volunteers, as I said, and have been very pleased with the progress of the MEP 2040 commitment. Want to remind everybody that our mission is to radically reduce total carbon emissions associated with building systems through our collective action. And this forum is a great example of that collective action. Our forums we do every 3 months, roughly. The first one this year was about manufacturers and EPDs. We're going to have some really exciting news coming out of the manufacturers and EPDs working group later in the program. This June, we held a hybrid in-person online event in coordination with the ASHRAE summer meeting, once again focused on what the building owners are asking of manufacturers and how they're responding to that in terms of transparency and disclosure, and preparing and producing material transparency. As I said at the outset, we're going to be talking about company plans today, and then our final quarterly forum associated with 2024 will happen in January around the time of the ASHRAE meeting. We may or may not do that in collaboration as a hybrid meeting with ASHRAE, but in any case, we'll be having a forum early in 2025 to talk about what we've gotten done in 2024. So I'm going to start off the panelists. We're going to take each of the companies in more or less alphabetical order, and we're going to ask them to give us a brief presentation about how their company plan came together, some of the challenges that they face, some of the things that the company plan really revealed to them. So in quick order, we're going to be talking with the folks at DBR, and that, let me pull up my bio sketches here. So Tim Kilby is with DBR and is their Director of Commissioning Department. and also a big contributor to their sustainability department. He's had over 17 years of commissioning experience, having joined DBR in 2000. His mission is to confirm that with their clients that they receive the best value on their investment on their building systems. Tim has been dedicated to their clients, working independently from the design team to promote a quality-oriented process for delivery of a project that will be energy efficient and operate as the client specifies. He has developed and maintains our extensive library of testing procedures and commissioning documentation, ensuring it's up to date with the latest industry.
Oh, you want 2024 or 2025? Yeah, sorry.
Saheed Imoru is DBR's Director of Sustainability, having joined the firm in 2022. He manages the firm's sustainability and net zero initiatives and has a wide range of project experience, including K through 12 facilities, hospitality, laboratories, commercial office buildings, and manufacturing distribution warehouses. With over 10 years of experience of practicing sustainable design in the AEC industry, Saheed has been involved in establishing energy benchmarks, performing energy management, solar feasibility studies, and designing net zero energy buildings. Saheed is well-versed in the latest building systems and sustainable design strategies. He's an expert on building energy modeling and believes that energy modeling has potential benefits for all types of projects. He works hard to assist DBR's clients to make the best data-driven decisions for their facilities. So, take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Kim. And I didn't know you were going to read those, or they wouldn't have been so long. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Kilby. I'm with DBR, as Kim said. We're an MEP design firm, mainly in Texas. We have just over 200 employees, and we have 7 offices in the state. But as we have a core group, as you could hear from that focuses on sustainability and promoting that net zero energy and carbon design in our designs in our office. So we were excited to sign on to the MEP 2040 commitment. And then, of course, that first thing is we need to have an action plan and a champion. So Saheed, our Director of Sustainability, as we talked about Fort Hill, he's our champion for that initiative. And he's here with us to talk about the plan.
Thank you, Tim. As we were developing our plan for MEP 2040, we took a couple of aspects out of what we did in the past with AIA 2030 and how we did reporting. And we wanted to try to make sure that we address the issues that we directly can have it a hand in, per se. One of the big things we wanted to know is how do we get to that goal of being carbon neutral by 2040? And one of the biggest things that we found out with our firm is that we just have to be able to educate our colleagues. And how do we go about educating our colleagues as well throughout the process to make sure that this is a continuing effort? So it's not a one-day push and then we forget about it in the next year or next couple of months. That conscious effort went a lot into our plan and how we develop our plan and how we are going to be executing our plan. Just trying to reinforce that idea of sustainability throughout the design process so we can educate our owners and also our clients as well whenever we are trying to make sure that we're hitting our as well as their goals. Now, one of the other bigger things that we are trying to do as we're executing our plan is to establish benchmarks for a lot of our buildings. There's different type of buildings that we touch all throughout the days and throughout our process, but we want to make sure that we have a benchmark set that we're trying to beat that benchmark as far as taking steps to get to MEP 2040 carbon neutral goal. And one of the big things that we know as a firm is that we have a big effect on our operational carbon, and that's kind of what we focus on in our day-to-day efforts. And as well as, during this plan, as we were coming up with it, just trying to make sure that, we are listening to open ideas and trying to make it as collaborative as possible. So we definitely will try to educate establish benchmarks and identify opportunities, and also influence our clients' decisions as well as our designers' decisions as we go throughout this process to hit our goals for 2040. You can go next time. So as we're trying to execute this plan, one of the biggest learning lessons that we're learning is just being able to get ahead of the design machine. And what I mean by that is we all know throughout the design process, we hit our SD phase, our DD phase, and our CD phase. And it is a continuing plug and chug process. But where do we come involved, and how can we affect the design process? We just make sure that since we know the steps that are coming, we try to get ahead of it as much as possible so we can inform our clients and our owners and our design teams to make sure that, hey, this is going to be the next steps, but let's think about it now. And we are currently in SD, where we can make the most significant effort to reduce our operational carbon footprint. Another thing that we are learning as we're going through this process is just trying to collaborate with owners as well as our colleagues to understand what their needs are. A lot of the times where we're coming from the sustainability aspect, we don't necessarily understand or take account of their aspects as well of what they're trying to achieve. So just being able to collaborate and work with our colleagues and owners is much, much, much better avenue rather than trying to force a lot of our sustainable ideas on them, and getting an understanding of what they want to do and what their goals are, as well as trying to be sustainable at the same time. And lastly, I would say the biggest thing is staying updated on cost. That's probably the biggest pushback that I have received since I've been working in this industry, is pushback on cost for sustainable efforts or sustainable measures. A lot of the times people say it's too much money, or they don't want to spend the money on that. But being able to show them a life cycle cost analysis, or show them how much money they potentially be saving over a 10-year period, a 20-year period, but just making sure that the building is going to be set up better in the future, it goes a long way to having that conversation. Because that's the number one thing I would say that we're learning as we're trying to suggest sustainable options or sustainable measures for operational carbon. And I guess with that, I think my 6 minutes is up, Kim. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Saheed and Tim. As for questions, we're going to save those to the end. If you think of a question and you don't want to lose track of it, feel free to enter it in the chat. But we'll be getting to the questions as we conclude each one of the panelists' brief presentations. So our next presenter comes to us from EwingCole. Dylan Jones is a mechanical project engineer and chair of the MEP 2040 committee at EwingCole. He's also a EwingCole is a multidisciplinary architecture and engineering firm. Dylan graduated from the Penn State University with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and received his PE license in 2022. Take it away, Dylan.
Thanks for the introduction. So good afternoon. So hopefully you guys have the plan open or kind of following along as I'm presenting, but I'm going to be presenting our MEP 2040. We refer to as our embodied carbon action plan. So to start, I just want to kind of go over how our plan's organized and some of its different components. At a high level, we really wanted this document to be easy to read and understand. So not many people particularly enjoy reading reports in that style format. So we wanted this to be structured more like a brochure or a pamphlet. So as you look through the plan, you'll see a lot of pictures and kind of a nice flow through the different sections. So first up in our plan, we have our firm commitment. This portion just serves to restate our pledge to sustainable design and serves as a reminder to those reading that we really need buy-in from everybody to achieve these goals that we've set out. Then we go on to specifically state what we're committing to as part of MEP 2040. This is really just a summary of the MEP 2040 goals to anybody that's reading that may not be familiar with the program. The timelines and target section is where we really start to get into the meat and potatoes part of the plan. We decided to break up our timeline into periods of 5 years with progressive targets. We break down the end goals into shorter terms, and this kind of just makes it easier to find our progress and stay on track towards reaching those end goals, checking in after each of those 5-year periods and reassessing where we're at. Also, I would like to emphasize the importance of establishing a baseline period to just define where you're starting from and what really constitutes those percentage reductions moving forward. After that, the actions item section is where we state our specific tasks that we plan to complete or changes to implement to reduce the MEP carbon emissions through our designs. As we progress through our plan and the timeline, this section will be consistently updated with new ideas. And then the last part of the plan, and arguably the most important part, is the project process integration section. That really just kind of describes how we're going to sustain these changes that we're making by altering our standard design processes moving forward. Because in our thoughts, we can't really make any lasting impacts unless you fundamentally change the standard processes and get everybody on board with that. So after going through the process of creating our plan, I just want to kind of share some insights and lessons learned. So first and foremost, I would say the best advice is just to get started. It seems like a daunting task at first, but once you get started and define those goals and timelines, the rest just sort of falls into place, kind of like a domino effect. Luckily for us at EwingCole, we also signed on to some of the other sustainability pledges, such as AIA 2030 and SE 2050. So we were kind of able to use their plans and documentation as a jumping off point for our MEP 2040 plan. Also, as an engineer, my specialty definitely isn't in graphic design. So I kind of leaned on our great marketing team at EwingCole to help format the document and make it what it appears as today. So I would advise anybody else as well not to try and reinvent the wheel. Lean on others for help and use existing plans as inspiration in shaping your own plan. This will kind of make getting started easier rather than just starting from scratch. Another thing that we've learned is the importance of transparency when attempting to implement these changes. Doing things behind the scenes just isn't really effective. So we found that having education sessions, newsletters, or really just anything to get the word out that things are changing, this is what's happening, will go a long way towards integrating those design process changes and getting people on board with the program. Lastly, I would just stress the importance of making your plan a living document. The landscape of sustainable design and architecture, as we know, is constantly evolving, and really so should your plan in step with that. So just make sure you have a schedule in place for updating your plan based on your firm's progress and achievements. Currently for EwingCole, we plan on updating and reissuing our plan every 2 years, kind of in step with our company-wide sustainability action plan. So with that, I'd love to share more, but in the spirit of time, I'll conclude my part of the presentation there. I wish everyone good luck in their journey in creating their own plans.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Next up is Glumac, represented by Nicole Isle. Nicole is the Chief Sustainability Strategist at Glumac, a full-service MEP engineering firm specializing in the sustainable design and operation of buildings across sectors worldwide. She's responsible for leading the firm's 2030 Climate Commitment Action Plan to decarbonize its design portfolio and business operations, and she leads the firm's sustainability team in their work to create innovation, high-performance building solutions at all scales. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so Nicole can share her screen.
Thank you so much, Kim. Everybody should be able to see my screen now. So it's great to be able to share our climate commitment action plan. The way that it came together is we wanted a plan where we brought together the tools that we had been working on to really institute our AIA 2030 commitment and, Carbon Leadership Forum 2040 commitment across the firm. And so the plan needed to be part education and part instruction on how to use the tools. as well as best practices around design integration using the integrative design process. And throughout the plan, I thought it was really important to highlight projects that we had worked on, and not just the accolades, you know, LEED certifications, et cetera, behind the projects, but the key strategies that we implemented to achieve those results. So much, you know, we often show pictures, you know, across presentations and in a lot of marketing and things that go out externally. But, you know, during the COVID time, we hired, you know, over 100 people, and we have a lot of new people who didn't understand a lot of the projects we'd worked on in the past. And this is a way to like bring everybody on board. And so highlighting projects and how we got there was important. Our plan is signed by our president, Joseph Fong, our director of engineering, Catherine Cunningham, as well as Chris Leung, our director of building sciences. And so it's important to have the leads across the firm who are going to be instituting the programs that transfer this knowledge through education and through the application of tools across disciplines. So our director of engineering houses our engineering services group, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, lighting, IT, and security groups. And then our building sciences group houses our sustainability team that I lead, as well as our energy team, commissioning group, and building enclosures consulting and commissioning team. So the goals that we have provided are what we wanted to do was launch the effort quite quickly. So start with, what are we going to achieve a year from now? We launched this plan on Earth Day this year. So a year from now, what are we going to achieve? And then what are our 2030 goals? And the goals are around, you know, getting all projects across the board, not just projects that start with sustainability goals, but projects that may not have had that conversation yet with the client, or the client hasn't come to us with their goals, to unpack that and really understand what, you know, what does sustainability mean to our client? How can we achieve greater results and move beyond code across our portfolio? You know, we have 326 people in the firm and 10 offices across the West Coast. There's a lot of projects that we touch on an annual basis, and we need to raise the level of performance across the portfolio. So it's the use of tools, as well as the creation of a variety of memorandums of understanding to really lay the foundation of how we reduce carbon in the context of resilience goals, water, healthy building goals, and social equity, and as well as embodied carbon, building upon our electrification memorandum of understanding, which we launched 2 years ago now, where we propose electrified systems as the basis of design on all of our projects. So we start conversations on all of our projects with electrified systems and the benefits and carbon benefit over gas equipment. So in terms of achieving our commitments, we start with our tools. And the tools that we have created are an energy benchmarking toolkit. And so what that is basically a video tutorial that we started, and then we stopped and we started again. We're recreating it because we found a better way to kind of get all projects into the AIA 2030 DDX platform. And that's basically having our project managers have access to that platform to register projects so they can get the zero tool score and the their baseline energy score in EUI, to then lay the foundation against, okay, what's the code requirement? How does this progress me beyond that? And then the tool helps with the discussions of what are the incremental reductions in EUI from the various end uses in the building that are going to help me get there, you know, considering the building's type, location, climate. So that's one tool that we have instituted. And that is really going to be a big training effort this fall. We were awarded a grant through the Energy Trust of Oregon to hire an intern so that we can greatly increase the number of projects we're reporting to AIA. We've got about 80 projects reported, and we need to really ramp that up. So along with the use of the Energy Star benchmarking tool, and I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to close it up with tools, is we have a project management checklist tool. And in that tool is basically the integrative design process laid out in terms of what we need to accomplish during the SD concept phase, DD, CD, and CA phases. And a lesson learned here was that we created this checklist tool integrated. It's an online platform with a series of checklists that our engineers use in their QA/QC process. That the engineers, it was a newer tool, they weren't quite using it across the board. So what we did was extract that information and integrate it into our SD narrative that all projects were using to lay the foundation on the direction of the project. So one lesson learned was, get the information in front of teams where using tools and applications, processes that are already successful, that they're readily using. And then also, our electrification memorandum of understanding also really helped progress things further, faster, because it just drew a line in the sand. It was a black and white document and said, we're not going to start project conversations with gas systems. We're going to start with electrified systems, and we're going to talk about the benefits and the to the owner to help educate and make good decisions. There are bigger factors at play with working with utilities and location and the project load demands, and it gets complicated and difficult fast, but we need to start with electrification as our and how we engage with clients in the design process from the very start. So our climate commitment action plan is publicly available on our website. You can click to it directly from our cover page, and I welcome you to take a look and reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to help you understand more of our tools and the way that we're doing things. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I just want to remind everybody that on the MEP2040.org website, the company plans that we're talking about today are available to you get to through the plans page. And if you click on company plans, you'll see that there's a brief description of each company's plan, and then a link to get to the document so that you can read through it yourself. Want to now move over to IMEG and Kaylee Levine. Kaylee is a senior sustainability consultant at IMEG, formerly with Rushing, with a focus on tackling climate change through the built environment. By developing the IMEG team's LCA services and heading the MEP 2040 committee, she helps clients better understand and reduce their project's climate change impacts. Kaylee is optimistic that her work on embodied carbon is part of a greater movement that will render the built environment a tool rather than a hindrance in the global fight against climate change. She recognizes that education will be the basis of this movement and is excited to bring the topics of LCA and embodied carbon to a wider audience, which includes all of you today. Kaylee?
Thanks so much, Kim. So yeah, I'm Kaylee Levine. I'm a senior sustainability consultant at IMEG, formerly Rushing, which is the first thing I wanted to mention, that we submitted our company plan last year when we were Rushing, but we've since merged with IMEG, who is happily another MEP 2040 signatory. And good news, our company plan survived the merge. We're still using that company plan at our formerly Rushing office here in Seattle. And now we're using Rushing's company plan to help create IMEG's official company-wide company plan. Okay, so now I can talk about the plan itself. Feel free to follow along if you download it from the website. The main sections that we included are listed here. I'm going to skip over the introduction and wanted to first mention that we included a section for commonly used terms. It may seem like a small thing, but we felt it was important to clearly define the terms in the plan, not only for our audience, but also for ourselves. Next are our big picture goals, and the goals echo the original MEP 2040 challenge, calling for net zero operational and embodied carbon by 2030 and 2040. And these acted as our guiding light and motivation behind the plan. One of the conversations we had when creating the plan was about our limitations on projects as engineers and designers, not owners, not the ones paying for the project and having the final say on what's going in it. So we emphasized that our role is to advocate for and aim to achieve those net zero goals. If the product of our MEP 2040 work is that every project is presented with a path to net zero and a case for why they should choose it, that would be a huge success. The last section in our plan is our targets and tasks. The targets break down the overall goal into more bite-sized pieces, and then we break down the targets one more time into actionable tasks. Another topic of discussion for us when creating the plan was that the MEP industry has a lot of unknowns, especially regarding embodied carbon, and that could make the idea of creating a plan seem difficult. So that's why for every target, we identified current tasks that we can do right now, and then future tasks that can happen when the industry progresses more. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we learned a lot in the process of making our plan. First off, we learned to lean into our strengths. I'm sure a lot of us are signatories because our firms are already aligned with MEP 2040's mission, and we do a lot in our normal day-to-day work that supports it, and we thought that should be celebrated. We wanted to find and highlight the work that we were already doing for decarbonization, but then we wanted to take our strengths to the next level. For example, we've always had a strong emphasis on advocacy and education with both our clients and with manufacturers. And we were already having discussions with manufacturers about low GWP refrigerants and EPDs. And now as part of the plan, we're taking steps to formalize and track our advocacy, as well as using official published MEP 2040 resources. Another example is refrigerants. When looking into quantifying refrigerant emissions for our projects, we found that our mechanical plans already have most of the information we need. There's just one missing step to turn that information into a carbon quantity. So now we're building in that process, also with the help of some MEP 2040 resources. Next lesson is to get collaborative. The plan spurred the creation of our MEP 2040 committee, which is an interdisciplinary team with members of our sustainability, energy, and mechanical studios so far. And it's been very productive for the different studios to share our distinct knowledge and perspectives and create a fuller picture of MEP carbon. Next is to leave room for growth. It's important to have ambitious goals, but not expected to get everything right the first time. And we actually care about our goals. It's not just PR. So if we fall short, we want to be honest about that and make improvements going forward. Along similar lines is not to let perfection be the enemy of good. Instead of saying there's no way to achieve all of our targets right now, or no way to have a super detailed plan for getting to them, we tried to think of at least something that we can do right now. That's why we separated tasks into current and future tasks. We can't do everything today, but we can do something today. Which leads to our last lesson learned or piece of advice, which is just do it. Getting started seemed daunting, but once we made it a priority, it's been a positive experience. And the next slide, please. So with that, I wanted to share some of the tangible value that we've gained by publishing our company plan. First is that we upheld the first of the MEP 2040 commitments. It feels good to keep ourselves accountable to what we signed up for. Next is that it helped with leadership buy-in. Related to that, it was the basis for a budget. Basically, every task of the plan became a line item in the budget for our MEP 2040 committee. Next is that it provided opportunity for widespread impact, mostly regarding Rushing's merge with IMEG. Because Rushing had a company plan published when we joined IMEG, Rushing's plan is now becoming the basis of IMEG's 2040 company plan that will extend across all 90 plus IMEG offices, making our impact go far beyond just our Seattle office. And now we get to build on our plan by integrating it into a comprehensive whole company, whole carbon plan that incorporates IMEG's other disciplines like civil and structural and their other commitments like SE 2050. And we're also excited by the prospect of updating our plan with IMEG's resources to make more ambitious targets, like doing carbon benchmarking for all projects using more automation. And lastly, because we published, we gained new connections and opportunities for knowledge sharing. A few like-minded firms, particularly architects, saw that we published and they reached out to talk more about collaborating and even invited us to speak to their companies about decarbonization and about our work. And we also had the pleasure of meeting with some members of the MEP 2040 steering committee while developing our plan to get their feedback. So thanks, Rob and Andrew. And now we get to speak to everyone at this forum. So thanks for your time. If you have any questions, I'll answer them at the end.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. Next up from Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, SOM, is my friend Leung. Luke is a fellow squared, both at LEED and ASHRAE. He's a member of the ASHRAE Center for Excellence in Building Decarbonization, also familiarly known as the CEBD, not the CBD, the CEBD, as well as a member of the City of Chicago's Decarbonization Task Force. And of course, he's a founding member of the MEP 2040 Steering Committee. It isn't widely known, but Luke and I are siblings, separated at birth. Luke is SOM's intergalactic principal of the Sustainability Engineering Studio. His work includes the Burj Khalifa, currently the world's tallest building. He also did master planning of Xiang'an, the Millennium City of China, and numerous other projects. Luke?
Yeah, I'm the brother that got all the hair compared to my brother Kim that has not much hair. So yes, SOM committed to a whole bunch of things, including AIA 2030, MEP 2040, SE 2050, and also science-based target. A lot of them is combined in this report here. So that's what I'm showing you. Next slide. So the targets are we actually start by walking our own talk. We thought it's important before we tell the other people to decarbonize, we should look at ourselves as a company, how we're doing. So we became a carbon neutral business in 2022. We aim at 2030 operational net zero and 2040 whole life carbon zero. Next slide. So we start looking at our own footprint. Next slide. So this is our current footprint, and we are carbon neutral by offset. Now you see the business travel is 54%. That was actually 2023. And we are getting much higher business travel this year. And so, yeah. We start tracking our operational performance through the AIA 2030 program starting 2012. Next slide. This is the progress of the last 10 plus years, how our projects been progressing, and we try to report majority of our projects in that process. Next slide. And you will see compared to AIA industry average. So those are the progression in the last decade or so. Keep going. We look at our refrigerant. The green line is North America. The blue line is EU. Next slide. We are concerned not only energy going to zero by 2050 or carbon going to zero. We also concerned how do we get to zero in terms of refrigerant emission. Next slide. So the red line is what EU passed last year. So we start looking at our equipment. That's the timeline of the red line, which is really, really aggressive. We are trying to discuss with our manufacturers and the folks in North America, how do we get to 2050 zero emission from refrigerants too? Next slide. So in terms of spec, we basically go through the entire spec. This is not our spec. This is more like Adams and the team will talk about with you, how do we update the spec. But we did that, update all our spec to include a lot of these EPD requirements and refrigerant requirement, etc. in the last few years. Next slide. So there's an aha moment. The aha moment for us is we realized it's a good business. Last year, we got $0 revenue from straight up carbon. But this year, we are projecting 25% of our revenue is carbon study, not MEP system design, but straight up carbon study. First, we thought, going to net positive building is nice, but it's not a good business. But now we realize you can actually make a lot of money out of this by doing carbon studies. Next slide. Not only you make money, but this is one of the projects we are involved in doing the whole life carbon study. It could be really high profile. Next slide. Next slide. And one of my favorite, we actually got a carbon decarbonization study, and the title of the study is Human versus Machine. So, and we are representing human. Thank God for that, my God. So we'll be competing with the machine to decarbonize a bunch of buildings for one of the organization. And if you are humans, please pray for us. We hope humans will win in this round. Next slide. So what's the lesson learned? Next slide. Liam Neeson in the movie Schindler's List, there's a moment he said, I did not do enough. I did not do enough. So next slide. And here's the reason why. First we thought, oh, wait, hold on. Next slide, couldn't see. Okay, there you go. So first we said, hold on, the whole world signed on to net zero emission. We are there, right? Next slide. But if you look at that, those countries up there, that's China, 2060, India, 2070, Nigeria, 2070. That represents 45% of humanity. And that portion of the humanity is actually not approaching 2050 to be zero emission. That means most likely we're going to miss the 1.5 degrees C target. So we can do more, just like what Liam said. Next slide. What can we do more? For example, China as a whole is 2060 net zero, but we decide to design sandbox differently with our client. In this project in Xiong'an, the Millennium City of China, we design a city that will be net zero by 2050 in this area. And it involves, next slide, transportation using electric high-speed rail to different cities. Next slide. And inside the city, having autonomous, electric, and public vehicles. Now, I'm not telling you anything that is confidential. This is all from public website. Next slide. So yes, guys, it's a good business. We can make money and we can do more because the work is cut out for us to create better future for humanity and make money along the way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Luke. Very inspiring. Our next presentation comes to us from Wight & Company. Bradley McClain is a mechanical engineer with over 15 years of experience specializing in nuclear power and HVAC design. A PE and certified passive house consultant, Brad currently serves as Senior Project Manager at Wight. In this position, he focuses on designing innovative and sustainable HVAC design solutions for K-12 schools. In addition to his PM role, Brad also serves as Wight's MEP 2040 champion, where he leads efforts to identify and implement the most sustainable MEP designs. Brad actively collects and analyzes data on refrigerant use and associated global warming potential, and cross-referencing this information against various HVAC systems to identify the most optimal systems with the least amount of embodied carbon and environmental impact. Brad?
Thank you, Kim, for that introduction. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. As Kim mentioned, I work for Wight & Company, and a little introduction to our firm here. We're an integrated firm. So we have architecture, MEP, and construction in-house, which is a great benefit. And it allows us to kind of do an entire project soup to nuts, and all be on the same page, on the same team, striving for the same goals. As such, our firm is also signatories to Architecture 2030 and SE 2050. And we've already been working on projects that are Source Zero, LEED certified. So it just made sense for us to continue on this path and become signatories of MEP 2040 as well. So just to jump in to the key concepts, the key components of our plan, very similar to what we've heard throughout this morning's discussion. First step is just establish a plan, establish your goals and just an overall outline of how you're going to achieve zero carbon by 2040. A big step of that at the onset is just requesting low GWP refrigerants, and just tracking that that use in our design, so that we can see the GWP, the environmental impact of our mechanical systems decreasing as we continue to get more efficient and learn more along this process. Another aspect is requesting environmental product declarations, or EPDs, as we've talked a lot about, updating our specs to call for that information, but also, when it comes time for submittal reviews during construction, continuing to advocate for that. Not all the time are we getting EPDs, and so that'll be a comment on our response. And it, certain products might not have EPDs, but we're under the thought that if we continue to advocate for it and continue to request it, the industry will respond. Kind of what came first, chicken or the egg? Are EPDs going to come first, or is it going to be a result of us asking for them? So that's a big part of this as well. And also, we've heard it said education is a huge part of this. So we're committed to participating in quarterly forums like this for MEP 2040, along with the CLF community as well. So as time moves on, we'll continue to evolve our plan and integrate with other disciplines in the Wight firm, and make this an iterative process. What our plan looks like now may not be what it looks like in 5-10 years from now. And I've said, as I mentioned, education being a key component. It's not just educating our staff here, which is a big part of it, is bringing them along with it, but it's also educating clients, and making sure that we are kind of bringing them along too, sharing our plan with them, and getting them excited. So that leads me to this next point. Kind of my big aha moment as we were getting through this is you can't do it alone. At first being tagged as our firm's MEP 2040 champion, it's a little daunting at first, but I quickly realized, get everyone else excited about it. This is certainly where the world is heading, and it's of critical importance. So bring everyone else on board. Share the plan, not only internally, but talk about it with clients too. Get in that, get those design discussions early on with your client. Don't wait until the last minute. Early on in the process, talk to them about ways that we can have more sustainable design, or have lower carbon impact, and help them feel like they're part of the decision-making process as well, and that they understand the reasons behind it. Also, bring in manufacturers reps. Share your plan with them. Let them know that you're going to be bugging them about low GWP refrigerants and electrifications, and products like heat pumps, and have them come in for lunch and learn. Share with your team what products they have that are moving along those directions. Again, so that we can not only learn from them, but be advocates in the industry that, you know, we want products from our manufacturers to continue down this line of reducing carbon, the carbon impact on our environment. And so just quickly, if you can go to the next slide, kind of the advice, lessons learned I've learned through this is if you haven't gotten a plan together, just jump in, get started, put something down on paper that you can commit to and start small. Like I said, this is going to be an iterative process for all of us. You know, I'm sure if we had a panel discussion in 5 years from now, it'll sound different than it does today. So, you know, don't let the unknown stop you. How are you going to get to zero carbon by 2040? Well, you might not know all the steps today, but what can you do in the next year, in the next 5 years, in the next few months, you know? So don't let the unknown stop you. And like I said, my last point here is start small and keep going. You know, we started with just tracking refrigerant use in our projects over different systems, whether it be you know, through packaged rooftop units, VRF systems, and kind of plotting that along what refrigerants were used and the impact, and so we can continue to narrow down and refine our designs in a way that's going to be that's going to support our goals here for MEP 2040. So in the essence of time, I'll leave it at that. But as I said before, this is a great group. So if this is your first forum, keep coming, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Brad. And winding us up is Sarah Halstead from Windward. Windward is a Native American-owned firm with a focus on designing for the next 7 generations. With a growing sustainability group, Sarah is taking on multiple responsibilities to advance environmentally conscious solutions within Windward's projects. In addition to her role as a mechanical designer, she leads the firm's energy modeling efforts, presents energy performance results to clients, and develops and trains her team on sustainability strategies and oversees LEED certification projects. Sarah?
Hi, everybody. Happy to be wrapping us up today. I'm Sarah. Thank you, Kim, for the introduction from Windward Engineers and Consultants. You move on to the next slide. So like Kim said, we are a Native American owned, fairly small firm. We have a small but up of 2 to 3 people, and we work very closely within our mechanical and electrical teams to integrate our sustainability efforts in all of our projects. We've been getting a growing base of geothermal and decarbonization and LEED projects that are slowly allowing us to get more and more involved in sustainability efforts. Next slide, please. So our plan started off with company accountability. How can we first address how we operate, and what can we do to lead by example? We also took a look at our ownership, which is Native American based, and the Shakopee tribe has a belief that you should always be thinking about the next 7 generations. And that's something they apply everywhere, but in our design, we like to think about how that can influence our design. And it also gave us some special considerations when considering sustainability, because the Shakopee tribe has a focus on water conservation, air quality control, and environmental impact. So we tried to consider those things, and we've been developing metrics outside of just what is required through the Carbon Leadership Forum to kind of address what we can do as a special background company. Our plan starts with very small percentage of our projects, and we phase over time. We've seen a lot of the companies talk about starting small and growing. That is the best way to start, in my opinion. It's really important to start where you can make an impact and build that foundation of understanding and connections. And then throughout the years leading up to 2040, we're going to be able to grow into that 100% carbon neutral. Our plan includes operational and embodied carbon. We benchmark and conduct life cycle, operational, and energy carbon emissions analysis on major projects. We focus on right sizing. We look for low GWP refrigerants, and we also have EPDs and TM65 in our plan. We follow the Carbon Leadership Forum's goals for EPD phasing. We thought that was a good place to start. We've been doing a lot of training on EPDs and refrigerants, and also on other low embodied carbon practices that we can be using. So like a lot of people have said today, training is very important. The other thing that's very important is tracking and reporting and making sure you develop that baseline. So a year from now, 5 years from now, we can understand where we've came from and how we can continue moving forward. Our aha moment, and forgive the very busy page of graphs, was we started providing pre-SD and SD energy models and reports to our clients. And this wasn't always something that was requested of us, but we wanted to make sure our clients, when they were considering different system types, understood the long-term impact of those systems. So we provided cost estimates of systems they were considering. We provided the life cycle cost analysis, the return on investment, and overall, these life cycle cost analysis, something really cool happened that we didn't really expect. Clients got really engaged and they got excited about these new ideas. And in a lot of cases, we've done at this point, I think 6 to 10 of these reports. And we've had multiple clients go from either natural gas burning or like electric boilers to a much more efficient system because they saw these data-driven reports and realized that it was financially worth it for them to move forward, and it actually changed their mind. And that was so exciting for us to see clients that we thought would never consider a geothermal system deciding to go geothermal. So that has been our big aha moment of this can work. This can work. It can be profitable for both us and for our clients. Lastly, our lessons learned. It seems like a lot of us today have come to many of the same lessons learned. Don't get stuck. Focus on what you can impact. We're a small firm that had its own challenges, and we have our own limitations, but we were able to focus on where we have strengths and pivot to areas of agreement if disagreement does come up, or if you hit a point that you just can't get past, move to a point where you can impact, come back to that later. Drafting process is really important. Brainstorm, jot down ideas, have a conversation, write the perfect world plan. What would the perfect plan look like? And then use your revisions to address feasibility and to scale that back to what's reasonable for your company right now. And have big dreams. Make sure that you're meeting the goals down the road. Track your progress, make that baseline, make plans on how to track your projects, what projects you're implementing these ideas, and then also training, keep your team engaged, have discussions, and really focus on training up the entire team, not just mechanical, but also reaching out to your architecture groups and to your electrical groups and everybody involved. So that is that. I'm super happy that we're here today, and I hope everyone has some good questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and all of our panelists. Like to be able to open it up for questions. Andrew, can you help me with managing the questions in the chat? And while you're doing that, I'm actually going to ask our panelists a question. As you've been listening to your colleagues present their company plans, did anything interesting jump out at you? Was there something in one of their plans that you hadn't thought of doing that you think is really important, or just something unique that you might incorporate into the next generation of your plan? So panelists, go ahead and jump in.
I'll start first. I think one thing that I saw that I think is a really great idea is breaking down, in some ways 2040 seems like a long way out. In other ways it feels like it might be here any minute, but breaking down your plan into what are your goals in the next year And then what are your goals in the next 5 years? And then continuing to go back, look at that and edit that as necessary. I think that's a great way to, be able to not only continue improving towards your goal of MEP 2040, but also being able to celebrate those victories of those small, those accomplishments that you're able to achieve in the short term as well. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with that in the fact that including future goals and things that may not be accomplishable or attainable at this point, but just for tracking and making people aware of it, including that in your plan. One thing I did want to ask about anybody that had kind of an overarching company plan instead of a broken out plan between the different sustainability pledges. I was wondering if that was something that was planned or something that maybe, say the way we kind of do it, we broke it up into each sustainability pledge has their own plan, and then we have one, it's really focused, and then we have one overarching company-wide sustainability action plan. So I was wondering if there was any plans to break yours up or maybe have other plans that are more focused.
Yeah, I would say that our plan started as a response to an AIA 2030 commitment, how we're going to get there. And then we joined, CLF 2040. So it was all about, the tools, the processes, and the reporting. But we found that, it's great to have these specific action plans, but we had never really documented our approach to sustainable design and the way that we think about it, the way that we think about the integrated design process, the way we think about the integration of carbon with health and with equity goals, water, resilience. And so that's why our plan is part sustainability action plan and then part, climate commitment reporting. Let's focus on the metrics and how we're going to be part of the solution here. So I would say that ours is combined. And that helps, I think, because it's part pragmatic and it's part education of bringing everybody along, which I would say is the hardest part, that sort of internal campaigning. You always have new people. We have a new director of engineering this year. And so there was that onboarding and education and kind of bringing her along so that she became a leader in the process. Yeah, so I'd say it's a combined effort.
When we first created our plan as Rushing, it was a little simpler because we were an MEP firm, but now as part of IMEG, we're incorporating it into the larger vision for whole carbon, for telling the whole carbon story. We're still planning to have distinct parts of the comprehensive decarbonization plan, but all in support of this greater vision. And I am feeling pretty inspired by that, just from part of the work that we've done so far in our office as a result of our plan is talking about embodied carbon of MEP systems, which, as I said, has a lot of unknowns, but some of our brainstorming came up with synergies with other disciplines. So how MEP and structural interact and how changes in MEP can perhaps allow structural to reduce their embodied carbon. So thinking about how these different systems can have interactions in pursuit of overall reductions in carbon is the mindset that we're using going into it.
Any of our other panelists have questions for the other panelists? All right, Andrew, can you help me with the Q&A?
Yes, I can do that. I also want to make a quick announcement. Folks, to our dismay, I've discovered that many people have been trying to join the meeting but have been prevented from doing so And the problem is that as the Zoom host of the meeting, I'm a member of the Carbon Leadership Forum staff. My Zoom account is currently limited to hosting a maximum of 100 participants. And this happened because we at the CLF recently went through an organizational evolution and changed our Zoom account. So I apologize. We are recording the meeting, and I'll be sending out an email to everybody who registered, which is a lot more than the 100 people who've been limited to attending this meeting right now.
It's a
Fortunately,
good
we've got
problem
that.
to have, that we have more people wanting to get into the room than we had space for. But for anybody who wasn't able to join us, thanks for listening in on the recording. We really appreciate it. All right, Andrew, let's get to the Q&A.
All right, so one question from Darrow Center is, what year in your timeline plan do you intend to start only designing systems that are fossil fuel free or 90% free? That is, only burn fuel on site less than 10% of the time. And will you tell owners that after a certain year, you will no longer consider systems that burn fuel on site more than 10% of the time? And that feels like a question that could go to any or all of the panelists.
I guess I can throw an answer out there. So we already are doing some projects that are electrification based and zero fossil fuels on site. I think it's largely client based and pairing with clients that have similar goals as you. And again, getting it out there in the beginning of the project phases, what your goals and what your intentions are. I think in the next 5 years, we'll see legislation start to be put into place that will more so require some of those features. So I think it's going to be a lot in step with that as well.
Nicole, I seem to remember that Glumac has sort of we start with electrification. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We start with electrification as our basis of design, proposed option to the client. If the client desires a gas-based heating system, we'll outline the benefits of electrified systems in relation to carbon emissions to assist the owner in making an educated decision. Should they desire a gas-based heating system? In the cases a client, chooses a gas-based system, we will still provide engineering services, but that said, we will ensure that we start the conversation with electrified options. We haven't drawn a line in the sand saying we're not going to design any gas-based systems. I think that's in certain maybe situations you might be able to draw that line. But I think what is most important is to work with the challenges at hand and keep progressing those conversations forward. We have a large project where the utility promised us electrical capacity for 100% electric design, got through DDs, and the utility changed their mind and said they don't have the capacity for us. So that's a big deal. And working with the utilities and the grid availability and reliability is a big deal. And so we're changing the way we approach these conversations to progress them forward, that these things happen. And I think that, we're also working with a lot of higher ed campuses where they have, central utility plants that can be highly efficient, but, run off gas to produce steam. And so, we need to work with them and develop these phase out plans. And that's what, we're doing. So you got to work with, the status of the sort of current times, but progressively with the mindset, know that the future is electrification.
Any of our other panelists want to respond to that question or?
Yeah, I mean,
comments?
Yeah, similar to what the other panelists talk about. Sometimes it's not a one size fits all, right? So you take a grid that is relatively dirty, and that is many electric grids around the world. Even in US, some grids are not as clean as the others. And then if they are using refrigerant 410A in a heat pump, which I still have projects doing that even this year, right? And you do the whole life. I guess the point here is you really need to do a whole life carbon study first to see going electrification is the way to go. And oftentimes you have a dirty grid, not going to be cleaned up in 10, 15 years, and you are using 410A for the equipment. Electrification may not be your answer. So, we just have to go through that whole life carbon study, especially in existing building where they bought a gas boiler, so the embodied carbon is already sunk, right? So that you really need to go through that and understand if in whole life carbon that is actually the way to go. So yeah, it's hard to have one size fits all.
Here in Seattle, we're lucky to have a pretty aggressive energy code. So if we aren't if owners aren't convinced for certain measures, then the energy code is a good stick or carrot to get them fully inspired. But we had this discussion about whether we would turn away projects and decided that's not part of our general vision for how this will be implemented. We want to work with clients where they're at and see positivity in bringing people into the conversation rather than pushing people away and having them find designers elsewhere. We'd like to be involved in as many projects as we can.
All right, Andrew, another question?
Yeah. So Margaret Logan has this question. I have a question for Brad McClain of Wight. She says, you write, request EPDs, but why not TM65s? As you know, for manufactured to order, items like pumps, an EPD would take longer to secure than to manufacture the pump.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one of the challenges we're faced with. Again, at the onset of this plan, the kind of vision was more short term of what products can we get EPDs for, like ducts, pipes, sealants, those types of things, insulation. So that's where we're at here is starting small with that, being able to quantify some major parts of our design. But no, you're absolutely correct in moving towards seeking that TM65 is the way to go. And I fully agree with your point. It was more just where can we start now, and where can we build for the future?
Great, thanks. And then next good question is from Monica Chatwani. And the question is for Luke or others. Does anybody have examples of data center embodied carbon studies or whole building LCAs that highlight the contribution systems of MEP systems and equipment and the total carbon impact? A lot of studies focus on structure and exterior skin, but it looks like it's not the full picture. Luke, you're in the target area of this one, and other people really can jump in and comment, as well as members of the steering committee. It's a great, hard question.
Yeah, I haven't.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm glad you got the answer. Please go ahead.
Okay, you're next. So as far as embodied carbon of MEP systems, I think the general consensus is that it's very difficult right now. It's not common in any standard, whether you're using LEED or other LCAs typically focus on enclosure and structure, as you mentioned. Right now, we're at the exploratory phase of trying to learn more about MEP embodied carbon. So there's the one-click LCA pilot program that's happening that everyone in MEP 2040, I believe, is invited to participate to start using their MEP tool that's in a pilot phase. And I believe that we'll probably hear more about that at some point. So at my company, we're exploring using that tool. We're looking into other ways that we can just learn more about embodied carbon, but definitely not the standard. It's part of our current task right now is to research and learn more and hopefully get it to a place where we can have full LCAs that include MEP. Kind of a non-answer, but Luke, do you have something better?
Unfortunately, no, because we don't, I haven't done a data center whole life carbon study before. I know of who, I can see her face right now, that did this sort of study. I can ask her, but I would imagine because just the nature of data centers, not a whole lot of architecture. So the MEP component, especially on the operator, on the B6 and B7, the amount of water and the amount of energy you use got to be pretty big. So I think the MEP component is going to be pretty big. But it will be good if anybody has that sort of data that we can have some fun together right here.
Well, there's a follow-on comment to that same question from Scott Burney. Scott says, it's been my understanding the main obstacle has been the lack of data points on the carbon footprint for the mechanical equipment as well as the data server equipment. We're working on developing a process for estimating the other parts of the MEP system, including ductwork, conduit, pipe wiring, et cetera, even if we don't have EC data or embodied carbon data on equipment. I'd love to hear others' thoughts about what to prioritize. Any comments, or Scott, if you'd like to follow up on that question as well.
I was going to say, I had put in the chat that in TROBA, we've talked about in some of the DAR meetings that they have an embodied carbon case study for data centers, and it looks like Annika's put a link to that in the chat. I know that there's mentioned they presented that at I2SL recently and some other conferences, so that's at least a reference to check out.
We've got another comment.
I was just going to add.
Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, yeah, I was going to add, I mean, there is we don't have the data points we want yet. We don't have the multipliers. But I think one area to explore is extracting the data, extracting the quantities is a very large part of the process. And that can happen now without the data. So I know that there's some advances in Revit, and I think some are creating tools to do that, but being able to just easily, in the click of a button, extract the quantities is going to get us really well prepared for when we have that multiplier. So I think, that's certainly something for people to think about and perhaps share through this group, because if we can all get to that point, then there's a lot of stuff we can do with the data besides embodied carbon, but for this purpose alone, it would be worth it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a really good point. I think to date where we have found success is the engineers just having conversations when they're starting projects with manufacturers and the system options that they're comparing, requesting low GWP refrigerants that can perform to the same standard, similar standard that they're wanting for their project, because there is a lack of data out there when it comes to EPDs. I think the TM65 process is a good interim step and will help educate us a lot about material quantities. Taking that information from getting those takeoffs from Revit and for ductwork and sort of the large material components of the system will just help understand, looking at what the embodied carbon impact is of those large material components, and then, understanding any options out there for alternatives, or just having that of recycled content steel, for example, and just having that conversation with manufacturers just to help progress their education and advocacy to get those EPDs in place. But for Glumac, the majority of the conversation has been around refrigerants, having discussions with manufacturers, focusing on, large central plant systems where there is a big refrigerant, could be a big refrigerant impact, and also tackling VRF systems. And, just having better specs around the being careful installation of VRF systems because it's done on site versus, factory built. So there's a lot of room for error there and use a lot of refrigerant, or just avoiding, VRF systems. So I think there's things that we can do in the absence of data to lower embodied carbon impact.
So I just put a link in the chat from one of the engineering company out there looking at their mechanical and electrical system on the high end. It's embodied carbon module A to C, looks like it add up to 55%. So just one data point.
Next question we have, actually, this is, I think, directed at the steering committee. Can we get an entire MEP 2040 quarterly forum session on diving into ASHRAE, SIBC, TM65 for North America? Sounds like a great idea for consideration at our next steering committee meeting. And then another follow-up question actually from Nissa, going to the point that Nicole just went over. What tools are folks using to help you track refrigerant usage and determine your baseline data? Any thoughts about that from anybody in the panel or anybody outside the panel as well?
I think Brad talked specifically about doing some of that work.
Yeah, so I don't have a specific tool other than just crunching the numbers. And really what we've done is we've taken every component from our drawings and we've updated our project schedules so it's a little bit easier to track. And this also goes into, my suggestion on getting the entire team involved. So it's not just one person collecting this data. But it's essentially going project by project and component by component and looking at what refrigerant they use, the charge for that piece of equipment, and then the GWP impact of that refrigerant, and also GWP equivalents, based on the equipment and leakage and life cycle of the equipment, and having that being able to kind of organize that data based on not only GWP or not only refrigerant, but also the system that we're using that in. And so we can kind of use that as our baseline of, for this past year, here's the different systems we've used refrigerant in, here's the amount of refrigerant and the GWP equivalent. And then just continuing to update that and hopefully starts finding some correlation between, what systems are better in that essence, and also as we start phasing out specific refrigerants and moving towards lower GWP refrigerants, just looking at that overall. So I don't have a specific tool other than good old handy Excel and just staying on top of collecting that data as we move through the year, and not just waiting until the end of the year to try to go back and find all this information, because that's a little daunting.
On the question about a forum dedicated to TM65 for North America, I know that ASHRAE has really been instrumental in creating the TM65 for North America, and I hope that they very soon come out with some expository information about that. Right now, our plan for the next forum is to hopefully roll out the MEP, embodied carbon and life cycle study that we're going to hear a little bit more about in the working groups. But I don't want to dampen anyone's enthusiasm about suggesting ideas for upcoming forums. If there's something that our community wants to bring up in the forum, that is a perfect justification for bringing it up in a forum. So thanks for that suggestion.
Well, here's another question that came after Luke's original presentation, but there are a couple of responses and extensions of that question in the chat as well. From Todd Gehring, Todd says, in the context of an average utility grid with respect to percentage of fossil fuels used and designing in a climate that requires limited backup heat, when using air-cooled heat pumps, it appears less carbon intensive for, say, the next 15 years to provide backup heat with condensing natural gas boilers rather than electric heat. Do you agree? And Julie replied, well, we look at the specific utility info for the location rather than using the average for the US. In many locations, it's less carbon intensive to be all electric from day one. And Todd Gehring also said, we look at specific data for the grid as well. In our area, electric resistance is worse than natural gas condensing boilers. Any other thoughts that folks might have about that specific question?
We've certainly conducted studies to compare what we're talking about with local grids. We've done some in California and we started with electric boilers because that's what a client was most interested in, and pared that back, and we're able to find that by coming down to heat pumps with particular COP, we were able to make the operational cost of their system the same, despite the fact that electricity was more expensive. But the carbon impact was also about evened out. So it's important to understand the grid for sure, because that has such a big impact on the operation in your local area.
Thanks, Sarah. And here's a question for Adam McMillan. Do you think that the CO2e material coefficients that are now in TM65 for North America can be used to calculate embodied carbon in the Revit environment? I think that there's a lot of potential to automate EC calcs almost real time to help our designers understand the impact of system choices. And Scott Burney followed up with a comment that his group, DLR group, is working along these lines with our internal technology group to automate EC calcs. And there are a lot of obstacles depending on the Revit modeling standards in different firms, disciplines, et cetera. Any thoughts or response from Adam then?
Yeah, so I think I'll share my non-knowledge of what those exact factors are in that particular TM65. However, I think when you think about the equipment stuff's hard because there's so many components, and that's why MEP is difficult, but there's a whole lot of carbon in the non-equipment pieces like the pipes, the ducts, and all that. And the data is sitting there in Revit, and it's just a multiplier. The math's simple. It's just a matter of, like the other person mentioned, how it's modeled. So I think that feels like low-hanging fruit and can establish a pretty reliable baseline. And then I would think, reducing everything by 10% and having the easy data to back that up, because the design decisions you make is a win, no matter what refrigerant you choose. It's a win on the pipes and the ducts and everything else too. So that feels like that's ripe for development. And then once the factor changes, then you're only changing one number and the software is updated. So I think I'll just echo, I think there's a lot we can do to get ready for this data. I don't want people to not act because that data isn't there yet, because it's really just one part of the whole thing we're trying to create here, I think.
On the question of grid emission factors, I've pulled up the first public review of ASHRAE standard 240p, which is ASHRAE's standard for life cycle greenhouse gas emission calculations. And what they've done is created a table that takes you from 2020 to 2050, and some instructions that if you want to go beyond that, and on different grid sectors have given you the emission factors on a kilogram of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. Now, big caution, this is a draft of 240p. It is not the final version, but I know the committee is working very hard to get a first edition of 240p out this year. So we will have in hopefully very short order a national standard that represents what we should be using for future grid emission factors.
Yeah, that's kind of can be a mid-range scenario. But one thing to point out is that in that scenario, if you plot the curve, it's not like linearly dropping to 2050. In fact, actually towards that 2050, it does funny thing, it pick up more. It's kind of like dropping rapidly and then flatten out. So just bear in mind, it's not a linear progression to 2050. And towards the end, it actually starts ramping up a little bit too.
But it does represent a national standard approach for doing these studies. So rather than having to roll your own, you can lean back on ASHRAE and ANSI to give you that safety net. And if you don't agree with the numbers that are being presented in ASHRAE 240P, you're going to have a chance to submit suggestions for revisions and addenda. The committee has already said that they know that they're not going to let perfect be the enemy of the good, and we expect to see numerous addenda coming for 240. So, Andrew, do we have one more question before we move to the working group reports?
Yes. The original question going back all the way to Luke, the question to Luke, could you expand on what carbon studies entails? There's been some interesting conversation about that in the chat window, most recently from Jamie Backus. I'll read Jamie's question, and Jamie, you can follow up or expand it if you'd like. What eGrid, GEA, or BA are you finding this to be the case? How many hours in the year are using the boilers versus grid? If you can restrict the hours, and even those hours are limited, they're not installing the gas on day one, makes the future transition simpler rather than hoping the boiler is removed at the tipping point you found, which might mean before its service life is over. Jamie, would you like to expand on that or point it at somebody in particular on the panel?
That was actually just a thread between Todd and I. That wasn't a particular member.
Oh, okay. Got it. So any
but it still was. Went to Luke.
All right, it went to Luke. Luke, I think you may have already answered what you know, but if you'd like to continue, please do.
Maybe I'll elaborate a little bit more. Yes, I was surprised that whole life carbon is good business. You heard me say 1 year ago when I do the projection of this year, I thought I could get less than $100,000 of service in whole life carbon, not MEP service, calculating whole life carbon. But this year, my group now has a backlog. 25% of our backlog is not in MEP. It's calculating whole life carbon for buildings. Now, let me post this for the group here. In EU, starting 2027, all new buildings will have to do whole life carbon. What discipline will do that in the future for EU? Similar in US, in California, July, we start the embodied carbon study in structure and envelope, moving into whole life carbon. Which group in the future will do that is a question for all. But in our case, we see this increase in whole life carbon services becomes 25% of our group's revenue in the backlog this year. And basically it's whole life carbon, and also we are involved in different IT and electric car company to categorize their new building and understand how do we report those components every year back to the scope 1, 2, 3 reporting for their ESG of their company. So those are the services we offer. It's all on carbon. So yeah, let's make some money and make the world better.
So before we get to the working groups, let me just point out another answer to a question that I think is valuable in the chat window about what are the tools available to use that people can use to track refrigerant usage and determining baseline data. And Julie and Kaylee Levine both pointed out the refrigerant impact tool that's linked from the MEP 2040 website to the to a tool that was developed by Borough Happold. And that's a really great place to start. And then finally, I'd like to make an announcement. The ECHO project, the Embodied Carbon Harmonization and Optimization Project, is a collaboration among about 20 different organizations, all of which are related to or conduct or host lower carbon decarbonization targets, initiatives, certification programs, education programs, reporting programs, including the USDBC, the new definition of a lead standard, for example, and many others, including the MEP 2040 commitment. And about a month ago, or about 3 weeks ago, the ECHO project announced the release of a document that they've been working on for the last year and a half called the ECHO reporting schema. This is a document designed to align data reporting on embodied carbon for projects across all of the commitment programs that are available. And you can go to the website to read that, to take a look at that data schema, as well as an introduction to the reporting schema and describing what are all the what are the objectives and the categories and the components of the data schema that refer not only to whole life carbon generally, but to MEP in specific as well. And within the last 12 hours, the ECHO project has just released its project lifecycle assessment requirements. And these are the ECHO recommendations for alignment. One of the things that this announcement means is that MEP systems, MEP structures and components and products will all have a common reporting schema and reporting mechanism and pathway with all other whole life carbon categories. And I'll put this in the chat window so that you can see that as well right now. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Kim.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much to our panelists on presenting their company plans. I cannot express enough gratitude to these 7 folks and their firms for being brave enough to make that first step and put themselves out there as examples and guidelines and trailblazers for doing the MEP 2040 company plans. And once again, make sure that you go to the MEP2040.org website, go to plans, go to company plans, download, read, and get started. So I'm going to now turn this over to Kaylee to talk about what's been going on with the data analysis and reporting working group. Kaylee.
Thanks, Kim. We are very happy to announce that the Beginner's Guide to MEP Embodied Carbon will be coming out in just over a month. Hopefully, fingers crossed that we will get it published within that time. We've had about 20 or 30 of us who've been working very diligently over the last 9 to 12 months on this guide. It's come from so many great individuals who will all have their faces published in the guide. Too many to name right now. But this guide is such a great step forward for all of us. There's been so much great conversation here about exactly those things that we need to start doing. And we need to take that brave step in terms of saying, we know that there is not exactly the right information, but if we let perfect be the enemy of the good, we'll never take that step. So what we've done within this guide is say, how would an engineer approach this if we were able to extract all of that knowledge out of our heads in terms of that A1 to A3, the product specific rules around piping and ductwork and wiring and conduit and cable tray and electrical equipment, mechanical equipment, geothermal heat pumps, plumbing fixtures, lighting. Those are the categories that we chose to dive into and say, we think there's a lot of embodied carbon there. And there's a hell of a lot of embodied carbon there. From the study that we were able to dive into very deeply, discreetly, but able to pull out simple enough language and knowledge and saying, you might be missing all of your fire protection piping, all of your sprinkler piping in half of the country because they don't model it. And you might be disguised into thinking that you actually pulled it all out if you weren't looking at the details. So actually extracting that knowledge and how you would go about getting some of that information out. So that's what we really were focused on in this A1 to A3 how-to section of the guide. We then have a really specific case study where we dive into how you would approach A1 to A3 for all of those sections within the guide. We'll also have resources on the MEP 2040 website, calculation supplements to each of those sections if you need them. So we were working closely on each of those sections to say, how would you go about doing quick piping takeoffs or ductwork takeoffs? What's the easiest way to do that so that you're not down a rabbit hole every time, kind of standardizing the way we go about that, trying to make it really simple. And then doing the same thing for A4 through D. We know that there is not a perfect methodology there, but trying to follow standard industry practice where possible in following the EN guidelines, RIC standards that have been set out, ASHRAE 240P, trying to find the best of all worlds with the data sets that are available, working with our partners at Train and Turner and trying to find the best of all worlds. We also were trying to establish functional equivalence for a case study that we had, and using those rules that were established within ECHO, working really closely with the building side, trying to establish that for the MEP systems as well. Because we had a really interesting case study here with an interesting climate zone. That's something that we would think about really deeply. This is one building we were looking at. We want to develop benchmarks where we have hundreds of buildings we're looking at eventually. So one of our goals that comes out of this is that we establish a benchmarking template so that we are able to collate lots of buildings so that we can start to develop a feeling for what does whole life carbon look like? What do those trade-offs actually feel like when we start to say, you know, a geothermal heat pump building in this climate zone has these kinds of metrics? How do we start to actually compare them to a different building topology? We need to be able to have lots of data, not just one building. So that is our challenge, that after we publish this guidance, that we're able to actually start collecting data and start to be able to make those whole life carbon trade-offs. But we needed this first step to be able to get there. So we're really excited to be able to share this with all of you finally.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. We at the steering committee are super, super excited about this. We think this is going to be an industry-changing document and effort on the behalf of MEP 2040 and its signatories. So let's move on now to a report from our friends at the Manufacturers and EPD Working Group. Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So I think one thing, and Luke kind of gave a preview during his presentation, we've been working and talking a lot about spec language and how we can start to get new language into all of our specs at all of our firms. So Shannon with Train is going to share that here in a minute. And she and Elza Mullins worked really hard with a subgroup to put this together. So happy to share that here in a minute. We have another working group goal of kind of getting a graphic together about timelines for what EPD is available and what the future priorities are. That's still underway. Nothing to share at this time, but that's another initiative that we have. And then a third initiative that's underway, and we did talk about it at the last forum. PNNL has been working with a number of manufacturers and other people loosely connected to MEP 2040 to create some LCI templates for, in this case, their first example is rooftop units. So while there isn't a lot of EPD data out there, as we know, and we've been talking about it, manufacturers, especially, they need help getting started. And what can you do before going all the way in with an EPD? How can the data be collected? What's a process for doing that? So she's working specifically with manufacturer groups to help develop that. I think a big charge for manufacturers and EPDs is that we want to make sure the manufacturer voice is heard in the decisions that we make as well, since they're the ones ultimately responding to all these requests. So that's kind of what's been in mind here, and I'll turn it over to Shannon to talk through the spec language.
Thanks, Adam. Here to present today on a new resource that should be up soon, if not already, on the MEP 2040 site. And that is some base language that can be used in any and all specs to request embodied carbon data for MEP equipment. You can see our working group up there. I want to give a lot of credit to Elsa. She's on maternity leave right now. She was our fearless leader through this effort. And so the kind of the starting point was some of Skanska's specs that they had started to use to request embodied carbon data from MEP. Here's a little bit of a screenshot preview of what you're going to see in those specs. But if we can go to the next slide, I'll give an overview of how we set this up and how it's meant to be used. So in the document, you'll see two specs for two different areas. There's language for a very general MEP equipment section of the specs, and then some additional language that you can include in specific subsections where you'd like to request embodied carbon data for specific pieces of equipment, however this shows up in your spec. If we go to the next slide, I think I'll dive into that first piece first. So again, this is general language to include in your overarching MEP section of your specs. This includes a detailed list of references that you can include, as well as some key definitions around EPDs, embodied carbon, LCA, PCRs, TM65, etc. Really helps level set up front, especially for slightly more uneducated audiences on these topics. And then in this more general document, there is a submittal subsection where it asks for embodied carbon data in submittals. This includes some proposed language that you can use around how to determine which equipment may require embodied carbon data, as well as a hierarchy of data sources for embodied carbon. And we landed on this hierarchy so as to acknowledge that EPDs are the best available source of data, but to acknowledge the gap of the fact that there is still a lot of EPDs missing for MEP equipment. So we did include in that hierarchy sources like TM65. Again, the additional language for a specific subsection, this is meant to complement and enhance the general language provided up front, but mainly a little bit of a shorter section for you to include in each of the pieces of equipment where you'd like data, if you'd like to get that specific. And it includes proposed language around, in this case, just the hierarchy of data sources. And it does refer back to that general section, so we encourage you to include both. But again, this should be up on the website soon, and hopefully a resource that those who are just looking to start to specify embodied carbon data for you to take and use in your specs going forward.
Thank you very much, Adam and Shannon. Very exciting. Once again, one of those great resources that's free to the entire public, and we owe a great debt of thanks to the folks with the manufacturers and EPD working group for giving us this really practical information that we can start including in our projects. Andrew.
Yeah, so the communications working group doesn't really operate as a full group. Our job is mainly to maintain the communications channels for the MEP 2040 initiative or commitment. And I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, we started the LinkedIn channel about 8 or 9 months ago, and we currently got over 700 followers for the commitment. We'd like to make 3 requests. First of all, make sure that your company and other employees at your company are following the MEP 2040 LinkedIn page and then contributing to it. There's a great opportunity for ongoing significant conversation and promotion of the MEP 2040 commitment and discussion of the challenges related to the various commitments that are part of it. So please feel free to target the # MEP 2040 tag on the LinkedIn, on any LinkedIn posts that you do related to MEP systems. and help us to grow the number of people who are part of this conversation. And then secondly, we'd love to get a few volunteers to be backup publishers on the website. It's a very simple communications platform and easy to do a little bit of training to help out on that. I'm currently the person who maintains the website, and it would be great to have a few other people who are backups for me to make sure that we're responsive and get all the content up that needs to be up. So if you're interested in that or know somebody who is interested, potentially get them in touch with me. I'm Andrew at carbonleadershipforum.org. Also on LinkedIn posts, it would be helpful to have a few people who are joining in making the LinkedIn posts from the MEP 2040 commitment. And that's about it.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Are there any other comments or updates from the steering committee? All right, we've got just a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions or comments for the working group updates, I think we've got time to handle a few of those. Anybody want to chime in? Don't be bashful. You don't have to use the chat if you just want to unmute yourself and throw us a question.
Kim, let me just add another little report or suggestion. Sometime later today, we'll have the recording of this call up and available on the MEP 2040 website. And I'll be sending out a notification to everybody who's on this call, as well as another bunch of people who were unable to get into the call, to say you can take a look at the recording here. And a great way to build this movement and to expand the reach of the MEP 2040 commitment would be for all of you who are on this call, when you get that email from folks today on how people can take a look at the video from this call, spread it to everybody in your organization, in your company, and encourage people to go to the MEP 2040 website and sign up to be on the email list, so that you'll get invitations. They will all get invitations to the next quarterly forum.
All right. Hearing no additional questions or comments from the forum and its audience, let me thank you once again for joining us for the 11th quarterly forum, and we look forward to seeing you soon at the 12th quarterly forum. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Kim.